Good afternoon or evening, everyone. Welcome to the 2024 APHG Exam Prep webinar hosted by the American Geographical Society's Geography Educator Initiative. Today, we are focused on giving you the tips and resources that you need to know in those final weeks before the APHG exam. My name is Elodie Nix. I manage the educational programs here at AGS, and I am based out of New York City. I'd like to extend a really warm welcome to everyone in the audience, as well as to our amazing panelists that we will hear from shortly. Today, we are joined by Dr. Lisa Benton-Short, Ms. Annalisa Dahlgren, Mr. Kevin Kerner, Mr. Dan Snyder, and Ms. Allison Cecil, who will take you through everything you need to know to master your review week. Before we dive in, I want to give you some brief background information in case you are not familiar with the American Geographical Society, or AGS. We are a 21st century learning society dedicated to advancing geographic and geospatial thinking, knowledge, and understanding across business, government, academia, and the broader public. APHG teachers are at the forefront of shaping the next generation of geographically literate leaders. We recognize and appreciate your dedication, creativity, and generosity in introducing students to the world of human geography. Throughout the relationship AGS has built over the past few years with APHG teachers, there is one fundamental cornerstone. We are here to help, and we do not ever want to sell you anything. We believe in the absolute importance of geographic education, and we will do whatever we can to help you as the people who make geographic education possible and accessible to so many. We are always exploring new ways to improve and expand resources for teachers. That is why we created the Geography Educator Initiative. Through the GEI, we provide valuable programs and resources to APHG teachers. So I want to take a closer look at some of these resources. First is our GEI newsletter. It features updates on new lesson and project plans, professional development opportunities, special events, funding opportunities, and much more. Second is our weekly roundup, which is our newest edition, and it combines our geography posts on our various social media platforms with daily geo highlights from that week's global headlines. Weekly roundup packages our organization's digital geography education outreach in a fun and easy to share format. GeoBoost is an AGS program designed to enhance your students' geographic thinking. We provide microgrants to select APHG teachers for the purchase of geography and geospatial-related activities or resources. The application will open in early fall, so keep an eye out for when that application is released. Our Daily Geo is a short daily news blast that showcases the essential role of geography in headline stories. It's delivered directly to your inbox every weekday morning, providing with fresh insights and resources to integrate into your lessons. We also have webinars and video content that are curriculum-based and designed to help you develop professionally. You can find all of our resources on our AGS YouTube channel. We also offer professional development opportunities, teacher-led webinars on key topics, teacher workshops during our annual Geography 2050 Fall Symposium, and opportunities to earn professional development and continuing education credits. The application for the Teacher Fellowship at this year's upcoming Geography 2050 Symposium is now live, so scan the QR code here or visit the tiny URL listed on this slide. And the follow-up email after this webinar, we will also be including the link there as well, as long as broadcasting it on our various social media platforms. If you're ready to explore the resources and programs we've just introduced, scan the QR code or visit our GEI page on our website to learn more. And now it's time for what you all are here for, to hear from our panel of top educators. First up, we have Dr. Lisa Benton-Short, who will be covering everything you need to know about task verbs. Over to you, Lisa.
Thanks, Elodie, and thank you so much for organizing this really important webinar for teachers, because we do really want your students to succeed, and we want to be able to provide you with some ways in which you can really help prepare your students over the next 3.5 weeks before the 2024 exam. So Elodie, if you go to the next slide. So I will very quickly run through the basics of the exam. Most of you already know this information, but it's always good to just start with the basics, right? So the exam in total consists of both a multiple choice section that accounts for 50%. And keep in mind that although there are 60 multiple choice questions, that some multiple choice questions are in sets of 3. And these sets of 3 MCQs usually are tagged to a stimulus, a map, a table, a graph, or some sort of chart. And in all cases, students need to be able to correctly interpret the stimulus in order to answer the multiple choice question. So hopefully you've been working with your students on not just multiple choice, but multiple choice sets. The second component of the exam, and worth 50%, are the 3 free response questions. Each free response question is worth 7 points, and typically we'll have parts A through G, 7 parts total, for a total of 21 tasks over the 3 free response questions. And I know Annalisa will talk a little bit more in detail about the FRQs, but just to remind you, one of the ways that we're trying to be really transparent and help your students to succeed is to be very clear about what they can expect in each FRQ. So when they open up that exam booklet, the very first FRQ they will see will not have a stimulus. The second FRQ, or FRQ2, will always have one stimulus. This could be a map, a table, a chart, a satellite image, a photograph. And then the FRQ3, the third FRQ in the 3-set free response section, has 2 stimuli, always will have 2. This could be 2 maps side by side. It could be a map and a satellite image. It could be a table and a map. So that really helps your students to anticipate what they can expect when they get to the exam. What I'm going to focus on today and do in a very quick way to leave lots of time for everybody else is just to review the 5 critical task verbs found in AP Human Geography. Now, these 5 task verbs are the task verbs that your students will see for both the multiple choice as well as the free response. Hopefully, you've been practicing with your students and training them on how to respond to each of these 5 task verbs. But if you didn't realize that these were the key task verbs, you still have a lot of review time left to get your students used to these task verbs. So the first task verb is identify. The next task verb is define. We consider these to be entry level. That is, all of your students should be able to answer these questions. Next, we move to describe, which is considered to be kind of mostly in the mid-range of rigor or difficulty. Sometimes it might be entry level or proficient in the skill sets. The last 2 task verbs, compare and explain, these are your advanced task verbs. These are the highest level thinking. And these are where your students, especially your 4s and 5s on the exam, really need to be prepared and have had a lot of experience answering questions with these advanced task verbs. And I will say that because this is an exam where your students have the opportunity to earn college credit, that you should really expect in an FRQ to see mostly explain task verbs, okay? You're not going to see 3 identify task verbs in a single FRQ because that is just simply not rigorous enough for us to distinguish between the 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, and 5s. I do want to spend some time talking about the 2 advanced task verbs. And I hope some of you have heard variations of this, either because I've been attending APSIs or maybe because you've been attending some other exam preps. But oftentimes I'm asked, what does a student really need to do to earn that point when they're confronted with the 2 advanced task verbs, such as compare and explain? So I will pull an example from the O form, or the East Coast form, question 1. I hope this is that you've downloaded the FRQs from last year's exam and you have either seen them yourself, and so they're kind of familiar. But here is one way that your students saw the compare task verb from the 2023 exam. Compare one difference in territorial organization between the governments of unitary states and the governments of federal states. So compare also could be phrased as an explain one similarity or explain one difference. Generally, we're going to use the compare task verb when we're really asking them to compare. But I did want to let you know that you might also see, your students might also see explain one similarity or explain one difference. That is essentially asking or tasking them to compare. So one of the challenges that we've seen with its compare task verb at students is that they don't quite know what's expected. So as you're thinking about preparing them for the exam, hopefully you've been practicing with the compare task verb, and hopefully you've been really expecting them to use both X and Y in the comparison. In other words, referring back to the unitary and federal states, they have to say something meaningful about unitary states and then saying something meaningful about federal states. And that's what I refer to as closing the loop. They must say something about X and they must say something about Y, and it must be meaningful. In other words, they can't just say unitary states are this and federal states are not, because they haven't given a meaningful comparison or explanation. So let me give you two examples. The same from the exam from last year. So answer A, unitary states tend to have a more top-down form of governance. That was the only response to that part of the FRQ. So that response did not score a point, because as you can see in this response, the student was absolutely correct in stating that unitary states tend to have a more top-down form of governance, but you can see the response said nothing about federal state governments, right? So they did not close the loop. They did not give us something about both. If we look at answer B, we can see that the student actually did provide information on both, and that was a full explanation. So answer B reads, unitary states have a single government that expresses power over the entire territory, whereas, I love that word because that's an alert to the reader, hey, I'm now comparing. Whereas federal states divide power among regional governments that control a limited portion of territory. So that's a really great example of one, a student response that's closed the loop, and two, the rigor of a full explanation in an advanced task verb like compare. So my tip to you is practice, practice, practice having your students answer both X and Y when they are asked to compare. Elodie, next slide, please. So explain is one of the most important task verbs, and I hope you've been practicing with your students for many months by now on the explain task verb. Explain can be phrased in 7 different ways. So a student might see explain why something is happening. They might be asked to explain how something may occur. They might see it phrased as explain one way in which something about something will change something. Those are explains that we've seen a lot. I want to draw your attention to the explains, the last 4 explains. These are relatively newer uses of the term explain. And I bolded them because they are really advanced. The other explains can be proficient. Usually we think of explain as an advanced task verb, but it can be in the proficient skill category. But the 4 that are always advanced are explain the strength of a theory or a process, explain the limitation or weakness of a theory or process, explain a limitation of the stimulus, like a map, a table, or a chart, and explain the degree to which. Elodie, next slide, please. So in general, one of the things that we find is that students oftentimes stop short of full and complete explanations. So if you've been working with your students all year on writing more when they write their response to an explain task verb, I think you can feel pretty confident that they're going to provide a good amount of information that will reach that explanation threshold. You still have some time left, so I really encourage you to make sure that, for example, that you're really holding students to give me 2 sentences when you see in your response to an explain task verb. That would be one suggestion I would have. Next, please, Elodie. So why is explain so important? Well, let me give you an example. Here is one of the FRQs from the O exam. This was last year, I believe. And you can see that in part A, there's an identify as a task verb, but part B has an explain. Part C has a describe, and then D, E, F, and G are all explains. Right? So we have 7-part FRQ, where 7 points, and 5 of those 7 points are coming from the explain task verb. This really underscores the idea that explain is a really crucial task verb and one that your students are going to see a lot. They're going to see it a lot in MCQs. They're really going to see it probably 4, maybe 5 times in each of the 3 FRQs. So the more you practice with explain, the better prepared your students will be and the more confident they will be when they get to the exam. So I do want to talk a little bit about explain the degree to which, because that is one of the hardest skills that we're asking your students to demonstrate to us. These are skills 2E and 5D. They're advanced. They're some of the highest level thinking because in some cases, explain the degree to which has different correct answers depending on how your student supports their argument. So it's really important to understand that the threshold your students must include when they are tasked to explain the degree to which, their response must have a statement about the degree, high, moderate, or low, and they have to then provide their explanation for that. And why is asserting the degree necessary? Because there can be more than one correct degree. So it must be supported correctly and aligned. The degree must be aligned with their support. Elodie, next, please. So for example, here is an explain the degree to which from 2 years ago. No, last year. No, 2 years ago. Pastoral nomadism. And I'll draw your attention to part G, where it says explain the degree to which increased access to communication technologies may create cultural convergence among nomadic herders. So generally, your students will see and explain the degree to which in an F or a G, because we do try and scaffold difficulty in the FRQs. So let me give you a couple of examples. I'll give you an example that did not earn a point. So answer A, herders could use cell phones or Google Earth to share where they could find water for their livestock. This is a correct statement, but it is not a correct answer to the prompt, to the part G. First, there's no degree stated, so I don't know whether the student thinks there's a low connection, a high connection, but also the response does not relate to cultural convergence, right? So they're just talking about how information communications could be used, but not connected to cultural convergence. Let's take a look at 2 answers that did earn a point for different reasons. So answer B says, nomadic herders' increased use of technology could have a high degree of impact because when they speak together on cell phones, they might be using a common language to communicate, like Hausa. So in this particular example, you can see there was a degree stated, and they talked about that notion of a common language used to communicate. Now, did they have to say Hausa? No, that was just additional great information that this particular student included and was correct. I want to also draw your attention to answer C. Nomadic herders' increased use of technology would have a low impact because many of these groups are traditional and would reject modernization, having little use for cell phones or the internet. So this is another great example of a response that earns a point, but takes a different interpretation, is going towards the low impact or low degree and provides a very solid explanation for why it would be a low degree. So this is why students must indicate a degree, because if they had flipped it around and said nomadic herders' increased use of technology would have a high degree because they don't use cell phones, this would be an incorrect statement, right? So I hope this helps to begin to clear up, explain the degree to which. Elodie, next slide, please. So I just want to leave you with a couple of ideas. Remember, perfection is not required, not even for a score of a 5, right? We are not expecting your students to score 21 points in order to earn a 5 on the FRQ section, nor are we expecting your students to answer 60 of the multiple choice questions absolutely perfectly. So remind your students that perfection isn't required to do really well on this exam. And also, I'll just leave you with one more idea, and that is that all of us at AP Human Geography, in the teachers community, when we are at the reading come this June, we will be working with your students. We want your students to succeed, and we want to set you up to be successful as well.